Megan Turner stood at the front of the church, the sun casting a golden hue through the stained glass windows as she smiled at her new husband, David. She was 34, newlywed to a man 6 years her senior. David was kind, loving, and financially stable, a widower who had lost his first wife, Eleanor, 2 years prior. His children, Lauren and Ethan, were in their teen ages, distant but polite when she met them at family gatherings. Megan knew it wasn't easy for them to accept someone new in their father's life, especially so soon after their mother's death. But she was determined to make things work. She wasn't naive. Merging families could be difficult. Still, Megan had always believed that patience and kindness would eventually win them over. The early days of the marriage were peaceful. David seemed happy, and Megan was settling into their large, beautiful house in the quiet town of Asheville, North Carolina. But soon after the honeymoon period ended, things began to shift. Megan noticed small but unsettling things, the way Lauren would stare at her, as if assessing her every move. Ethan barely spoke during family dinners, responding with cold one-word answers. Still, Megan brushed it off, assuming it was part of their grieving process. But that changed the night David sat her down with a strange request. He wanted Megan to meet his children alone without him present. He assured her it was simply an opportunity for them to bond, but Megan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The following weekend, she agreed to host a family dinner, just the three of them. It was the beginning of the unraveling, though Megan had no idea what lay ahead. Megan nervously prepared the meal, trying to perfect the dish Eleanor used to make for family gatherings. It was Lauren's favorite, or at least that's what David had told her. She hoped the gesture would be appreciated. As the dinner began, the atmosphere felt strained, but Megan remained optimistic. Lauren and Ethan arrived punctually, dressed impeccably as always. The air of privilege and control they carried made Megan feel small, as if she were a guest in her own home. They sat at the dining room table, candles flickering softly between them. The conversation was forced, with Lauren making small talk while Ethan remained stoic and mostly silent. Megan noticed how Lauren would glance at her brother, almost as if they were sharing some secret communication. "How's the new house?" Lauren asked, her tone neutral but with an edge that Megan couldn't place. "It's been wonderful, really. David and I are." "Do you feel at home?" Lauren interrupted, her eyes locking onto Megan's with an intensity that made her falter. Megan swallowed. The question felt loaded. She managed to smile. "Yes, I do. It's been a great adjustment." Ethan finally spoke, his voice deep and unsettling in its calmness. "It must be strange, living in a house where so many memories of someone else linger." The statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Megan's chest tightened. She hadn't anticipated this kind of hostility. As dinner dragged on, Megan started to feel dizzy, her vision blurring around the edges. She excused herself, attributing it to stress and nerves. But when she stood up, her legs wobbled, and she nearly collapsed. Lauren rushed over, concern plastered across her face, but there was something disingenuous about it, something Megan couldn't quite place. "Are you okay?" Lauren asked, helping her sit back down. "I'm fine. Just lightheaded," Megan mumbled, feeling embarrassed. "Maybe you're not used to the house yet. Sometimes it takes a while for it to accept someone new," Lauren said with a small, cryptic smile. Megan's heart pounded in her chest. Something was wrong, very wrong. But she couldn't leave, not now. Not without raising suspicion. As she sat at the table, her mind raced. Was this just grief manifesting in strange ways, or was something darker lurking beneath the surface of her new family? For the first time since marrying David, Megan felt truly afraid. The dizziness Megan experienced that night didn't go away entirely. In the following days, she often found herself feeling lethargic and weak, the world around her taking on an eerie blur. She chalked it up to the stress of her new marriage and the awkwardness with David's children. But deep down, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something more sinister was at play. David was away on business the next weekend, leaving Megan alone in the house. Normally, she would have embraced the solitude, using the time to read or explore the nearby hiking trails. But this time, she felt a sense of unease, like she wasn't entirely alone. While cleaning the house, Megan stumbled across a locked drawer in David's study. She hadn't noticed it before, likely because she'd been careful not to invade his personal space. Yet something drew her to it now. After searching through David's desk for a key, she finally found one hidden underneath a pile of old documents. Her heart pounded as she unlocked the drawer. Inside, she found old photographs and letters, all relating to David's first wife, Eleanor. Megan knew he still cherished Eleanor's memory, and these items were probably just keepsakes, but the further she dug, the more disturbing the contents became. Among the family photos was a handwritten journal, Eleanor's journal. Megan hesitated for a moment, her conscience fighting against her curiosity, but ultimately she opened it. The entries were dated in the months leading up to Eleanor's death, and as Megan read them, her stomach churned. Eleanor wrote about strange occurrences, feeling ill for no apparent reason, having bouts of dizziness and confusion, much like what Megan had been experiencing. Eleanor also mentioned her growing suspicion of her children, Lauren and Ethan, describing them as cold and secretive, often speaking in hushed tones when she was around. The final entry was the most chilling of all. "I don't trust them. Lauren and Ethan, they want something. I fear that I'm not long for this world." Megan's hands trembled as she closed the journal. Eleanor had clearly been paranoid, but the similarities were too close for comfort. Was it possible that Eleanor hadn't died of natural causes? Megan's mind raced as she considered the implications. Her pulse quickened as she recalled her own sudden bouts of dizziness and Lauren's cryptic words during the dinner. Was this family harboring a dark secret, and was she now a target? The next morning, Megan woke to the sound of shuffling footsteps just outside her bedroom door. David wasn't due back for another 2 days, and she knew the house was supposed to be empty. Her pulse quickened as she slid out of bed, her ears straining for any further noise. It wasn't the first time she thought she'd heard someone moving around the house, but this time it was more distinct, too real to be her imagination. She grabbed her phone, creeping silently into the hallway. The sound led her to the stairs, but when she peered down into the living room, no one was there. Her breath hitched in her throat. It was then she noticed the door to the basement was slightly ajar, a place she rarely ventured. David had never mentioned it, and Megan hadn't felt the need to explore. But now, with her pulse thrumming in her ears, she knew she had to see what lay beneath the house. The steps creaked under her weight as she descended into the dimly lit basement. A cold draft swept over her, sending a chill down her spine. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and dusty shelves. At first glance, it seemed harmless, just a typical storage space. But then, Megan noticed something strange in the far corner, an old wooden chest, its surface scratched and worn from age. Against her better judgment, she approached the chest. Her fingers hesitated on the latch before finally lifting the heavy lid. Inside, there was a collection of strange objects, old family heirlooms, handwritten notes, and a series of bizarre, ritualistic symbols carved into small wooden figures. Megan's blood ran cold as she recognized one of the figures. It was a crude carving of a woman, one that bore an eerie resemblance to her. Her hands shook as she lifted the wooden figure from the chest. Beneath it, she found more carvings, each one resembling a member of the Turner family. But the one resembling Eleanor had been snapped in half. A nauseating realization began to take hold. Were Lauren and Ethan involved in something more than just family dysfunction? The cryptic symbols, the journal entries, the strange illness that plagued Eleanor before her death had all pointed to something darker, something deliberate. Megan couldn't believe what her mind was piecing together, but the evidence was there, staring her in the face. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind her, and Megan spun around, clutching the figure in her hand. Standing at the top of the stairs was Lauren, her expression cold and unreadable. "What are you doing down here?" Lauren asked, her voice low and steady, with an unmistakable edge. Megan's mouth went dry. She realized too late that she had uncovered something she was never meant to see. Megan's heart raced as she faced Lauren at the top of the stairs. The wooden figure in her hand suddenly felt like a damning piece of evidence, a symbol of something far darker than she had ever imagined. She slowly placed it back into the chest, trying to hide her trembling hands. I was just looking around," Megan stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what was down here." Lauren descended a few steps, her cold gaze never leaving Megan's. "You should have asked before snooping through family belongings." Megan felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about a basement or an old chest. Lauren had caught her in the middle of uncovering something terrible, something she wasn't supposed to know. Megan forced herself to hold Lauren's gaze, trying to muster some semblance of calm. "I wasn't snooping. I just wanted to know more about the house, about Eleanor." At the mention of her mother's name, Lauren's expression darkened. She took another step down, the shadows from the basement's dim light casting eerie shapes across her face. "Eleanor's gone. Megan, you don't need to worry about her." Megan's pulse quickened. The threat in Lauren's words was subtle but unmistakable. She wanted to run, to escape this house and its twisted secrets, but she knew she had to tread carefully. "I'm not trying to replace her," Megan said, her voice wavering. "I just found the journal. I didn't mean any harm." Lauren's eyes flickered with recognition. She knew exactly what journal Megan was referring to. For a long moment they stood in silence, the tension thick between them. Then Lauren's lips curled into a chilling smile. "You've read it, haven't you?" Megan nodded slowly, fear crawling up her spine. "That journal was Eleanor's way of coping," Lauren said softly, almost too calmly. "She wasn't well toward the end. She started seeing things that weren't there, suspecting everyone of being against her." Megan wanted to believe Lauren, but everything about the situation felt off. The journal, the strange illness, the carvings in the chest, it all pointed to something deliberate, and Lauren's demeanor only heightened her unease. Before Megan could respond, Lauren stepped back, her gaze softening just enough to give Megan pause. "You're part of this family now, Megan," she said, her tone deceptively sweet. "You don't need to worry about what happened before you came. We'll take care of everything." The words sent a shiver down Megan's spine, and she realized Lauren wasn't just talking about the past, she was warning her about the future. After that unsettling encounter in the basement, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The house felt different, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her, suffocating her with each passing day. Lauren's cryptic behavior lingered in her thoughts, but what disturbed her more was David's return. When David came home 2 days later, Megan had every intention of telling him everything: the journal, the chest, the conversation with Lauren. But when she sat him down that evening, staring into his warm, trusting eyes. The words seemed to catch in her throat. She couldn't explain it, but something held her back. Instead, she asked questions, innocent, probing questions about Eleanor, the house, and his children. David's responses were always measured, calm, as if none of it had ever crossed his mind. "You seem tense," David said after dinner, placing his hand gently on hers. "Is something bothering you?" Megan bit her lip. How could she possibly explain that she felt trapped, like she was living in the shadow of something dark and unknown? "I'm just trying to adjust. It's a lot, new family, new house." David smiled softly, reassuringly. "Give it time. Lauren and Ethan will come around. They're still dealing with their mother's death in their own way." That night, Megan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. David's reassurances did little to calm her. There was something deeper, something far more dangerous than grief beneath the surface of this family. A week passed, and the tension between Megan and Lauren grew thicker with each passing day. Ethan, as always, remained distant and aloof, but Megan noticed something strange. Lauren and Ethan began spending more time together, often disappearing into the study or the basement without explanation. Whenever Megan tried to bring it up with David, he brushed it off, claiming they were just bonding as siblings. But Megan knew better. There was something they weren't telling her. One night, unable to sleep, Megan decided to take a walk around the house. She tiptoed through the darkened hallways, her heart pounding with each step. As she passed David's study, she heard hushed voices, Lauren and Ethan, whispering in low tones. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but the urgency in their voices sent chills down her spine. Megan pressed herself against the door, straining to hear. It's almost time," Lauren whispered. "We can't let her find out." Megan's blood turned cold. They were talking about her. Suddenly, the door creaked open and Megan stumbled back, her heart nearly stopping. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression cold and unreadable. He didn't say a word, just stared at her with those same hollow eyes that had unnerved her from the beginning. Lauren appeared behind him, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Couldn't sleep, Megan." Megan's mouth went dry. She shook her head, unable to form words. Lauren's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You should go back to bed. You need your rest." Megan turned and fled down the hall, her mind racing. There was no mistaking it now. Something terrible was coming, and she was running out of time to figure out what it was. Megan barely slept that night, her mind tangled with fear and confusion. The cryptic conversations between Lauren and Ethan echoed in her thoughts, along with Eleanor's chilling journal entries. It was all beginning to make a twisted kind of sense: the strange illness, the wooden carvings, the secrecy that seemed to thicken every time she got too close to the truth. Lauren and Ethan were planning something, and Megan was certain she was the next target. The next morning, Megan decided to confront David. She had no other choice. There was no more time for hesitation or doubt. Something sinister was happening, and David needed to know. As she descended the stairs, she heard the faint clink of silverware. David was sitting at the breakfast table, reading the morning paper. Everything looked so ordinary, so perfectly normal, that it made Megan's heart ache with the weight of the secrets she now carried. "David, we need to talk," Megan said, her voice trembling despite her attempt at composure. David looked up from his paper, his brow furrowing. "Is everything all right?" Megan took a deep breath, her pulse quickening. "No, it's not. Something is wrong with Lauren and Ethan. I've been hearing them talk about me. I found Eleanor's journal. She was sick, just like I've been feeling. And there's something dangerous about them." David set his paper down, his expression shifting from concern to something more unreadable. He stood up, walking toward her slowly, his gaze steady. "Megan, listen to me. You're under a lot of stress right now. It's normal to feel overwhelmed." She shook her head, frustration building in her chest. "This isn't about stress, David. They're hiding something. I heard them last night," Lauren said. "It's almost time. They're planning something. And I think they did something to Eleanor, too. I'm scared, David." David's expression softened, but it was the kind of softness that felt like condescension. "Megan, you're imagining things. I know my children. They've been through a lot since their mother died, but they wouldn't hurt you. I would never let that happen." Megan's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him, to trust that David was right. But the weight of everything she'd uncovered was too much to ignore. "Please, David," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "There's something wrong with this house, with them. I need you to trust me." David sighed, his eyes filled with pity, and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "You're safe, Megan. I promise you, you're safe." But Megan didn't feel safe. Not in his arms, not in this house. As she stood there, clinging to the man she thought she knew, she realized something terrifying. David wasn't going to believe her. He was either blind to his children's actions, or worse, he was in on it too. That evening, Megan made up her mind. If David wouldn't listen, she would have to find the truth on her own. She needed more proof, something tangible that she could show him, or at the very least something that would tell her what Lauren and Ethan were planning. When the house grew quiet and everyone had gone to bed, Megan crept out of the master bedroom. She moved silently through the darkened halls, her heart racing with every step. The basement, the place where she had uncovered the wooden figures, was her only lead. There had to be more hidden down there, something that would explain the carvings, the illness, and Eleanor's fate. As Megan reached the basement door, she hesitated, her hand trembling on the knob. She took a deep breath, steeling herself before pushing it open. The basement smelled of dust and damp air, the shadows stretching unnervingly across the walls. As she descended the stairs, she made her way back to the corner where the chest lay, hidden beneath layers of dust and time. But this time, she didn't just stop at the carvings. She began pulling aside the old furniture and boxes that cluttered the basement, searching for anything else that could help her. And that's when she found an old, dusty photo album tucked away behind a pile of broken chairs. Megan opened it, her fingers shaking as she flipped through the yellowed pages. It was a collection of family photos, but as she scanned the faces in each picture, something felt off. The images of David, Eleanor, Lauren, and Ethan appeared normal at first, but then Megan noticed the subtle details. Eleanor looked sickly in the later photos, pale and gaunt, her smile forced. And then there were the pictures of Lauren and Ethan. They were younger in some, but their expressions were always the same, cold, detached, watching, always watching. Megan's stomach churned as she turned the page to find a series of photos that made her blood run cold. They were pictures of David's first wife, Eleanor, taken in the final weeks before her death. But these weren't just family snapshots. These were staged, deliberate. Eleanor looked frail and weak, her eyes hollow, her body slumped in ways that suggested she hadn't posed for these willingly. Suddenly, a creaking sound echoed from behind her. Megan spun around, her heart nearly stopping in her chest. Standing at the top of the stairs, shrouded in darkness, was Ethan. His face was expressionless, but there was something chilling in the way he stood, silent and still. "You shouldn't be down here," Ethan said, his voice low and monotone. Megan backed away, clutching the photo album to her chest. "What are you doing, Ethan? What did you and Lauren do to Eleanor?" Ethan's gaze was ice cold as he descended the stairs, one slow step at a time. "You've seen too much." Megan's pulse thundered in her ears. She bolted for the stairs, but Ethan was quicker than she expected. He grabbed her arm, yanking her back. Megan screamed, struggling to free herself, but Ethan's grip was strong. She twisted, managing to slam the photo album into his face, knocking him off balance just enough to make her escape. She fled up the stairs, her body trembling with fear. As she reached the top, she slammed the basement door behind her and locked it. But she knew it wouldn't hold for long. They were coming for her, and now there was no turning back. Megan realized one terrible truth. This family wasn't just dangerous, they were killers. Megan's heart pounded as she bolted the basement door shut, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The realization that Lauren and Ethan were far more dangerous than she ever imagined now pulsed through her like cold electricity. She had been right to suspect them, but the depth of their depravity horrified her. They had done something to Eleanor, something deliberate, and now they were coming for her. She had to leave, now. Megan grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. The line clicked, but before she could speak, the call dropped. No service. Panic set in. She tried again, moving through the house, but it was no use. The storm outside raged, and the old house's location in the remote hills of Asheville meant that the signal had always been spotty at best. Frantic, Megan dashed upstairs, hoping to wake David and get them out of the house before Lauren and Ethan could act. She burst into the bedroom, her voice shaking. "David, wake up. We need to leave." David stirred groggily, blinking at her in confusion. "Megan, what are you?" "They're trying to kill me. Lauren and Ethan, something's wrong. They did something to Eleanor, and now they're coming for me." David sat up, but his reaction wasn't what she expected. Instead of alarm, his face contorted with frustration. "Megan, this has gone too far." She stared at him, her panic giving way to disbelief. "What are you talking about, David? I've known for a while that this was a possibility," David interrupted, his tone calm, too calm. "Eleanor said the same things. She thought the children were plotting against her, too." Megan's heart sank. His words were like a dagger. You knew? You knew and you didn't do anything." David sighed, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Megan, please, you don't understand. Eleanor wasn't well. She started losing touch with reality, seeing things that weren't there." "No," Megan snapped, shaking her head. "This isn't like that. I found her journal. David, she was afraid of them. And now I've found more. Photos of her staged like they were watching her deteriorate." David froze at that, his eyes narrowing slightly. Megan pressed on, her voice desperate. "You have to believe me. They're dangerous. David, I'm not imagining this." For a long moment, David said nothing, his expression unreadable. Megan's mind raced. What was he thinking? Was he finally seeing the truth? But before he could respond, the bedroom door creaked open slowly, and Lauren stood in the doorway. "You shouldn't have woken him up," Lauren said, her voice cold as steel. Behind her, Ethan loomed in the shadows, silent but menacing. Megan's blood ran cold. She backed away from David, realizing too late that she had walked into a trap. Lauren stepped further into the room, her eyes locking onto Megan's. "It was only a matter of time before you figured it out." David stood, his eyes flicking between Megan and his children, something unreadable in his expression. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice uncertain now, the cracks in his calm demeanor finally showing. Lauren smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Eleanor wasn't strong enough. But Megan, she almost made it, didn't she, Ethan?" Ethan nodded, his expression blank, as if he were discussing the weather. We almost didn't need to intervene. Megan's stomach twisted in horror. What are you talking about? Lauren took a step closer, her voice almost conversational. We tried to let it happen naturally with Eleanor, but she fought it for too long. Eventually, we had to help her along. We didn't want to, but we had no choice. She couldn't stay. David looked stricken, his face paling. Lauren, what are you saying? Lauren's eyes flicked to her father, her expression softening for a moment. It's for the family. Dad, you know that. You loved Mom, but she wasn't part of the legacy. Neither is Megan. Megan's heart thundered in her chest. Legacy? What are you talking about? Lauren's smile widened, dark and twisted. You still don't get it, do you? This house, this family, it's all part of something bigger, something older. We have responsibilities, and sometimes that means making sacrifices. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Megan with a chilling intensity. Eleanor wasn't the first. And you won't be the last. Megan's knees nearly buckled as the horror of their words sank in. This wasn't just about inheritance or jealousy. This was something far more ancient, more sinister, something rooted in ritual and blood. David's voice was a broken whisper. You killed your mother. Lauren nodded, without a trace of remorse. We did what had to be done. And now Megan's time is up. Megan took a step back, her body trembling. She could see it in their eyes now, the cold detachment, the certainty that they had every right to decide who lived and died. They had done this before, and they were about to do it again. I won't let you touch her, David said, his voice hoarse, but Megan could see the confusion and pain in his eyes. He had been blind to the truth for so long that he couldn't fully grasp the darkness within his own children. Lauren gave him a sad smile. You've always been too weak, Dad, but don't worry. You don't have to do anything. We'll take care of everything. In that moment, Megan knew she had to act. There was no time to think, no time to plead. She bolted for the door, shoving past Lauren with all the strength she could muster. Ethan lunged for her, but Megan was faster this time, fueled by pure adrenaline and terror. She raced down the stairs, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She heard footsteps behind her, but she didn't dare look back. She needed to get to the front door, to the safety of the outside world, away from the twisted, murderous family that had once welcomed her with open arms. But just as she reached the door, Ethan grabbed her by the wrist, pulling her back with brutal force. Megan screamed, struggling against him, but he was too strong. He dragged her toward the living room, where Lauren stood, watching with calm detachment. Megan's vision blurred with tears, panic overtaking her senses. Please, don't do this. Lauren stepped forward, her expression almost tender. It's nothing personal. Megan, you were never meant to stay. As Ethan tightened his grip, Megan's mind raced for a way out. She wasn't going to die here, not like this. And in a moment of pure desperation, she reached for the lamp on the side table and swung it with all her might. It connected with Ethan's head, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Megan didn't wait. She ran, her feet pounding against the floor as she fled into the storm outside. The wind howled, and the rain stung her skin, but it didn't matter. She was free for now. But she knew one thing for certain. The Turner family would come for her, and this time they wouldn't stop until their legacy was complete. Megan sprinted into the dark woods surrounding the Turner estate, her heart pounding in her chest as the storm raged above. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking her clothes and blurring her vision, but she didn't stop. Every rustling branch, every crack of thunder made her fear that Lauren or Ethan was right behind her, closing in. She had escaped the house, but she knew that didn't mean she was safe, not yet. 8. She stumbled through the underbrush, her breath ragged and her body aching. She had no plan. No idea where to go, just the overwhelming need to get as far away from that house, that family as possible. But as the adrenaline began to wear off, a sickening realization hit her. She was alone in the middle of nowhere, and no one knew where she was. A distant noise, footsteps echoed through the trees, and Megan froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. She pressed herself against a large tree, trying to slow her breathing. Through the thick sheets of rain, she saw a shadow moving between the trees. Lauren. She was methodical, searching the woods with calm precision. Megan knew she couldn't keep running blindly. She had to outthink them. She needed to hide, or at least buy herself some time until she could find help. Spotting a narrow ravine a few yards away, Megan crouched low and made her way toward it, slipping down into the muddy trench, hoping it would offer some cover. She huddled there, shivering, her mind racing. How had her life spiraled into this nightmare? Just weeks ago, she had married a man she thought she could trust, only to discover she had been lured into something far darker than she could have imagined. The Turners weren't just a grieving family, they were killers, bound by some twisted sense of duty, a legacy that had cost Eleanor her life and now threatened to take hers. Suddenly she heard voices, closer now. Megan held her breath, praying they wouldn't find her. She recognized Lauren's voice, sharp and impatient. She can't have gone far, Lauren said, her tone icy. We'll find her. She won't make it out of these woods. Megan's heart sank. They were relentless. She had to keep moving, keep ahead of them, but every step felt like it could be her last. As the rain intensified, Megan made a decision. She couldn't run forever. She had to end this, here and now. Her thoughts raced back to the basement, to the wooden carvings and the strange symbols she had found. They had some significance, something deeper that tied the Turner family together. She didn't fully understand it, but she knew the symbols were a key to their power, to whatever dark ritual they believed in. If she could destroy them, maybe she could break their hold over her. She knew it was risky, but it was the only option she had left. The rain continued to pour as Megan made her way back toward the house, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. She circled wide, avoiding the paths where Lauren and Ethan were likely searching for her, her eyes darting between the trees, every sound a potential threat. Her body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the weight of what she was about to do. When she finally saw the dim lights of the Turner estate through the trees, she paused. The house, with its looming silhouette and dark windows, seemed more menacing than ever, but she couldn't turn back. Not now. Megan crept around to the back of the house, where the basement door was still slightly ajar. She slipped inside, her breath catching as she descended the familiar creaky stairs. The basement was as she remembered it, cold, damp, and filled with relics of the family's dark past. The wooden chest sat in the corner, its sinister contents waiting. She opened the chest and found the carvings again, the twisted, crude representations of herself, Eleanor, and the other members of the family. The carved figure of Eleanor was still broken in half, a haunting symbol of what had been done to her. Without hesitation, Megan grabbed the carving that resembled her and snapped it in two. A strange, unnerving sensation rushed through her, as though she had severed some invisible connection, but she didn't stop. She smashed the other figures too, Lauren, Ethan, even David, until they were nothing more than splinters of wood on the floor. But Megan heard a sharp intake of breath from behind her. She spun around, her pulse spiking, and there stood Lauren, eyes blazing with fury. Ethan lingered behind her, his face twisted with quiet rage. "You think breaking some carvings will change anything?" Lauren spat, stepping forward. "You're a fool, Megan." But there was something different now. Megan could feel it. The house itself seemed to groan, as though the breaking of the figures had loosened its grip, weakening whatever dark power held it together. She stood taller, her fear replaced by a steely resolve. "I won't be your next victim," Megan said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "It ends tonight." Lauren's eyes flickered, but her confidence remained intact. "You've made a mistake, Megan. We don't need the figures. We don't need any of it. This is bigger than you understand." But before Lauren could move, Ethan lunged toward Megan, his hands outstretched. Megan reacted instinctively, grabbing the nearest object, a broken chair leg, and swung it with all her strength. It connected with Ethan's head, sending him crashing to the ground, dazed. Lauren screamed in fury, charging at Megan with a vicious snarl. But Megan was ready this time. She ducked under Lauren's attack, using the momentum to push her back into the old shelves. The wood cracked and splintered as Lauren fell, debris raining down around her. Megan didn't wait for Lauren to get up. She turned and ran, her feet pounding up the basement stairs. Behind her, she heard Lauren shouting, but Megan didn't look back. She burst through the front door and into the storm once again, the cool rain washing over her. As she fled into the darkness, she could feel the weight of the house's evil lifting. Whatever control Lauren and Ethan had, it was slipping, but she knew this wasn't over. They would come for her again. But Megan was no longer the frightened woman who had married into the Turner family. She was ready. They had underestimated her. She had survived. And she would not stop fighting until she brought them down, once and for all. The Turners had made a fatal mistake. They had picked the wrong victim.